What up, people? Episode 7. Won't he do it? Won't he fix it? Won't he teach you how to Dougie? Yes, God has come through. End of season 1, episode 7. Going to be talking about crossing over on dry ground. Just going to recap how we got here, kind of my journey, and where the real miracles are. It's not always about what God does with the water, but sometimes it's about what God does with the ground. Stick around. Welcome to the Mindtime Podcast. I am your host, Jasmine Chambers, aka JC Revealed, aka Quay, where we are slightly southern, highly spiritual, but here to make you think. Every other Thursday, we raise a question about Christian living in this crazy world and the challenges that come with it from an African-American millennial perspective because, well, that is what I am. So if you don't mind a little Texas twang as we talk about life, current events, Christianity, the church, the Bible, and where God is in the midst of all of that, stick around. Listen, can we just testify for a minute? Y'all remember back in like the first episode where I was like, stick around for an episode or two and let's hope that I make an episode or two? Well, your girl is on episode 7 and I'm super excited about that because I have a bad habit of like starting stuff and not finishing. The Lord is working on me with that. So on the other hand, part of the reason why I did want to make this episode the end of season 1, your girl got seasons. This is what I'm excited about. The reason why I wanted episode 7 to be the last episode in season 1 is for several reasons. One, because they say 7 is the number of completion. Yes. So good place to round out this leg of the journey. And also because once we get into the further episodes, I will technically be back at work. So this ends the pandemic project portion of the Mindtime Podcast, of me just being at home under quarantine like the rest of y'all, keeping myself busy, doing what I do, trying to keep my skills fresh, learning some new things, and just talking. And so grateful for that. But yeah, this leg is over. So pray that your girl comes back for season 2. That is my goal, but I will have to work out making time to record and come up with episodes and all of that in the midst of working full time and all the other stuff I got going on in my life. But for right now, just really wanted to talk about how I got here and also about what my little podcast has done in some major areas of my life. So the Lord is doing big things for me personally with this little thing I'll be doing every other week. And so I just really want to pause right here and just really offer some reflections, because there are a lot of personal things that I deal with in ways that I think people who know me personally would probably be surprised by. And so one of those things is I have struggled for many years with feeling like I need permission from other people to do things, and feeling like I always need to partner with somebody or collaborate with somebody in order to do things of substance. And so even with this podcast, it's kind of the same mentality, because I had been wanting to do a podcast since early last year, and I was trying to convince a friend of mine to do it with me. She and I have really good conversations, thought-provoking conversations, just talking on the phone, texting, just hanging out. And so I was like, I think people would really benefit from some of the stuff that we talk about. And so I was like, let's do a podcast together. I mean, I had the name for it. I had some ideas for it, had some topics we could go on ahead and talk about. And I was just, waiting on her to be like, yeah, let's do it. And she was like, girl, if you don't get over there and start that podcast, which was really just her way of saying, and no, will not. Although I'm going to try to get her on a couple of times next season, because my thoughts have not changed about the fact that I think we have really good conversations that would bring people value and it's thought provoking, and she and I don't share the same outlook and theologies about a lot of stuff. And so kind of those differences make for very interesting conversations. But this was one of those things where it just boiled down to, okay, the person you wanted to start this project with has said no, now what? And I just really had to pull the trigger for myself and just be like, just do it. You want to do it. You have the capacity to do it. You have nothing but time now to do it. So just do it. And so the first little teaser episode or whatever came out April the 8th. And here we are. 7 episodes, which probably is a little bit more than that because I got a couple of half episodes in there this season. But really grateful for the journey. But that is something that I have struggled with. It's feeling like I need permission and partnership. And that can be a real struggle when God is calling you to do something. Feeling like you always got to have somebody co-sign on what God has laid on your heart. So that has been a very big learning curve for me, and just a place that I'm grateful that God has kind of worked out some of that angst that I have to just be like, you got to do it. God laid it on your heart to do it, and you go and you do it. And so that's really how Mindtime was birthed. Just out of, okay, nobody's going to do this with me. So this is where we're going to be at. And so getting over the need for permission and partnership was one thing. And then using this podcast and this platform to help me find my voice and my perspective. Now, this is something that I have struggled with for a while. So much so that, like, before we went on break, I'm a part of this Bible study. Shout out to BSF. And I was having my small group pray that I find my voice months before we even got to the pandemic. That was a real legitimate thing that I knew I was struggling with. What do I believe? What is my perspective? And if I was given a platform, what would that sound like? And so this has been very much a learning and growth process for me, even in that area. Trying to figure out, when I read the Bible, when I talk about God, when I talk about current events in light of spirituality and things of that nature, where am I coming from? And I have come to learn that my perspective in terms of how I interpret scripture, read the Bible, the lens that I use to look at the world, really comes from an eternally salvific perspective. A lot of that has to do with the fact that I grew up Baptist and Black evangelical church, and I had pretty conservative views, even though I went to a very liberal Bible college. And so being educated in two very different worlds, especially on spiritual matters, having studied formally in a very liberal place and then my upbringing in a very conservative place, I feel like I have always been kind of on the fence about certain things, never really truly subscribing to either side. And so it can kind of drive you crazy a little bit when you're trying to figure out, okay, well, do I think this or do I think this, or this is what they say versus this is what they say, and just really being intentional about allowing God to help me find my voice and my perspective. And so I'm much more comfortable with that right now. There are a lot of things that I'm still struggling with. The battle is not over, but I'm going to shout now anyhow, because the journey that I'm on to be okay in that area and the uniqueness of my experience in how I was brought up and in the way in which I was educated and continue to learn, and the people who are now in my concentric circle that don't share the same viewpoints that I have or the same belief systems, and how we are able to challenge one another really is a blessing. And so I'm grateful for that part of the journey as well. And so I know my Bible study group has been praying, because I feel like I'm finding my stride. And as I become more comfortable with my voice and my perspective, then I believe that the direction of this podcast will follow suit. So y'all stay tuned for the journey, and pray that your girl come back for season 2 so y'all can hear where I end up after all of this. The other thing is being confident in my gifts. A lot of people who podcast have a team. They didn't start out with a team typically, but once you get your stride and you start monetizing and all of that, people hire people. Well, we at square one. And so this is a self-run podcast from start to finish. Nobody else does anything for me in relation to this podcast, except for sometimes I talk to people about ideas, or I get questions and that kind of thing, or I run topics by other folk. But for the most part, the actual production of it is self-run. And so God has allowed me to be confident in the range of gifts that I have that allow me to do this. So from the name to the logo to the artwork to recording every week, editing episodes, uploading episodes, managing and creating the website, all of those things are things that I do every week or every other week for these episodes. And the totality of the gifts that God has given me allows me to do that, to where I'm not really being stretched in a whole lot of areas right now other than managing time. None of this is really hard for me, and it's things that I really do enjoy. And so just being able to operate in all of those different gifts for the last couple of months has really been a treat. Learning and researching what podcasting is, how does it work, how to make it better, how to grow your podcast. Like all of those things are things that I study and I research and I read, and just make small changes to try to get closer to what the ultimate goal is. But again, just grateful to God for the confidence boost in allowing me to be able to see what the totality of my gifts can produce if I put in the work and I do what I need to do to make sure that everything is in order. And so that's another one of those things that I'm grateful for and that this podcast has done. And then focusing on the journey, but not the outcome. It can be very discouraging to do anything and not feel like people are really bought in. And so it can be very discouraging to, put out these episodes every other week. And real talk, if we have 5 people that listen to these episodes, like, we doing good. And the focus for me really has been on what God is doing for me, and not so much of what I'm saying that appeals to other people. Like, we not there yet. Would love to get there one day. But you don't want to put all of your stuff out there when you're still trying to find your voice. And so not having like a broad audience, or like all these thousands of people or millions of people listening when you're just starting out is one thing. When you're still learning, that's another thing. And so I'm really grateful for what I call the covering stage. I do believe that God covers us for seasons of growth and development. God will develop you kind of behind the scenes, and in a way in which you can figure things out and work things out that you're not being highly scrutinized in the process, right? Because people can be just outright vicious. I mean, we see that on social media every day. And so I know a lot of the things that I talk about and a lot of viewpoints that I have and I'm kind of struggling and wrestling with could be challenged in really great detail. People love to argue about the Bible and how you exegete, what's your hermeneutic and all that other kind of stuff. Those are just fancy words for how do you interpret what you read when it comes to the Bible. But I'm really grateful for, again, just the platform to be able to work all those things out. And as I continue to grow, then I believe that, the exposure will come later. But the journey, again, has been the most rewarding in the midst of this pandemic. And so, like I mentioned in the beginning of this episode, and just by the way, y'all, I'm really not even scripted right now. That's another thing I can be excited about. I'm trying to figure that out. Like, I usually write manuscripts for my episodes, so I try not to ramble. And so I'm actually just working off a very basic outline. and just talking from an authentic perspective. Something else that I'm working on. Why don't I trust myself to just talk about the things that I know and that I'm passionate about versus feeling like I got to read it off a computer screen. So if this episode sounds different than other ones, that's the reason why. And so the journey, like I was talking about at the beginning, just reminded me and feels very familiar for me to the story in Joshua chapter 4, where God allows the Israelites to cross over on dry ground. Now, we know it happened the first time with Moses and the Israelites coming out of Egypt when they were being chased by Pharaoh, and they cross over the Red Sea, and God rolls back the waters and they're able to cross on dry ground. You may not be familiar with the second time that happens. After Moses dies, he goes up on the mountain. They never see him again. Joshua takes over as the leader of the people, and God promises, Joshua, as I was with Moses, so shall I be with you. And so God gives Joshua the command to prepare the people to cross over the Jordan River this time. Well, it was harvest time, and at harvest time, the Jordan River is at flood stage, which means they're not able to cross over. And so what God tells Joshua is gather all the priests, tell them to take the Ark of the Covenant, which was this box that symbolized the presence of God, and it had the 10 Commandments basically in like a jar manner, and Aaron's rod and some other things in it that was just symbolic of God's presence with them. So God tells Joshua, get the priests, tell them to get the Ark of the Covenant and walk it into the middle of the river. And so as soon as their feet touch the water start to recede. And so you have kind of a repeat of what God had done for their ancestors. Not necessarily on the same scale, because all their ancestors died in the wilderness. So you have like a smaller group, the river kind of being smaller, not necessarily God rolling it up on both sides, but kind of cutting it off. So that way it doesn't continue to flow in a way that allows them to cross over. And so the priests were responsible for just standing in the middle of the river. And all of the Israelites are able to cross over the Jordan River this time on dry ground. Now, a lot of us get excited about the water, right? The magnitude of the initial miracle of God rolling back the water or cutting off the water for them. When I was reading this and studying this, one of the things that I believe the Spirit allowed to jump out at me was the dry ground piece. We can talk about the rolling up of the water, but the real miracle is in being able to get from one place to another place on dry ground. And the reason why that is significant is because what good is it for God to roll back the waters if you still have the potential to get stuck in the mud? What would it have looked like for God's people to be excited because God cut off the water, and as soon as they step in, they start sinking? They start sinking, their children start sinking, their carts and their livestock start sinking. What good does that do if you still have to traverse through this mud? And so it's not always the big things that God does for us that is where the real story lies. Sometimes the real story, like it is for me, lies in the fact that God will allow you to get from one point to another point on dry ground, which just basically means when God does miracles, God will also stabilize you. God will also straighten some things out. God will also keep you from being tripped up over stuff that would hinder the progress. And so that really resonated with me because it's not so much of me being like, yeah, I got a podcast. Yeah, I got all this other kind of stuff. It really is the way in which God has been stabilizing me. One, in the middle of a pandemic, but two, also in how God has allowed me to get from one place in my life where I was scared to say stuff, feeling like I always got to get permission from somebody before I open my mouth, not sure what my voice and my perspective are, kind of being wayward in all of my gifts, worried about outcomes versus just really embracing the journey, and all of these other things, insecurities and fears and just stuff that would keep me from making forward progress, being a perfectionist. Because if it ain't perfect, we can't do it. I'm still struggling with this now. I have taped this episode. This probably tape number 5, because I tape it, listen to it, don't like it, try it again. Because why? It's not scripted. And so it could be better. It could be better. It could be better. And so even though I'm still in the journey and in the process, God is stabilizing me and allowing me to cross over on dry ground, just like he did for the Israelites. And the thing about it is, this wasn't any kind of noteworthy moment. When you look at the fact that all they needed was to get from one side to the other. This wasn't Jericho. This wasn't no battle. They didn't conquer nobody. They didn't take nobody's stuff because they won a war. This was just them having an obstacle pop up on their journey, and they needed God to make a way. There was nobody clapping for them. There was nobody cheering for them. There may not have even been anybody watching them. They were just on a journey, and God did it for them. And like I said, that really resonated with me, because this season 1 has been my testimony of what God has done for me. Not because people are applauding, not because I got all these people listening, not because I'm in the spotlight, but because I took a step of faith to overcome my need to ask folks for permission, to find my voice, to gain the confidence that I need. And God has been faithful. 1, to roll back the waters, which in my case would be God roll back work. I got laid off my job. First time I've ever been laid off. Laid off my job. I ain't got nothing but time. We are quarantined and on lockdown. I have no excuses. God done rolled back all of the stuff that I would have let hinder me being able to do this for the last 4 months. God rolled it back. But then he dried it up. He stabilized all of the things that would have kept me from moving forward. Didn't allow fear, didn't allow angst, didn't allow uncertainty, didn't allow the fact that what if somebody doesn't agree with how I exegete the text or what my point and my perspective is. Did not allow any of those things to stop me for the last 7 episodes from doing what I feel like God put on my heart to do. And then it's allowed me to cross over. So where I am right now at episode 7 is in a much farther place than where I started at episode 1. I have been able to cross over some things. And that's the same thing that God wants to do for you. What has God rolled back for you in this pandemic? What has God dried up and stabilized for you in this pandemic? What have you crossed over? Not for the applause of other people, but because God promised that he was going to complete the work that he began in you. There is a work to be done. When we come out of this pandemic, God's going to need more from us as believers than he did for us going in. So many people have struggled through this pandemic. So many people are going to be seeking and searching and asking questions and trying to figure it out coming out of this pandemic. And I believe that God has incubated us, not only as Christians, but as the collective body of Christ. Made us uncomfortable and prohibited us from being able to gather together in our sanctuaries as we normally would, because ministry has to look different coming out of the pandemic. And so I'm grateful for the journey that has happened while I've been sitting up in my living room every day. And so then you have to ask yourself, what's going to be your memorial? God instructed Joshua to pick one man from every tribe, and he said, listen, send them into the middle of the river where the priests are standing. And each one of them needs to get a rock. Now, we ain't talking about no David and Goliath slingshot kind of small rocks. We talking about like boulders. Because the text says that they had to carry them on their shoulders. 12 rocks. God instructed them to get and to take over with them. And they crossed over. And God told Joshua, now you build a memorial. Because when your future descendants and your children and your children's children ask, what do these stones mean? You tell them Israel crossed over the Jordan on dry ground. What's going to be your symbol of what God has done for you in this pandemic? What's going to be your sign? What's going to be the thing and the token that you have and that you keep to help you remember the journey that you've been on? I'll always be able to go back to season 1 and see where I started. I'll be able to go back and look at this episode that talks about what God has done for me these last 4 months. I'm going to work on getting me an actual token that represents this particular time that I can keep on my bookshelf or in my office or on my desk. But what will be your memorial? What will be your sign? Have you stopped to reflect and to thank God for how he has sustained you? How he has rolled back some stuff, allowed you to move at a slower pace, allowed you a season of rest, dried up some stuff so you could see what was really important, and kept you from sinking in ways that people out here are really sinking and struggling. If your bills been able to get paid, if your rent been able to get paid, if you've been able to eat during this pandemic, God has been good. Because everybody can't say that. So what will your memorial be? What are you going to erect as a memorial for your children and for your children's children when they say, when this pandemic and all this other stuff that's been happening with the Black Lives Matter movement and with these protests and stuff, when all of this stuff finally makes the history books and your descendants are reading about it and they're asking you, where were you when COVID-19 was running rampant across the world? You can tell them the stories and point to the sign and say, this was the sign that God allowed me to cross over on dry ground. I didn't drown in the pandemic. I didn't drown in financial issues. I didn't drown in starvation. I didn't get taken over by the virus. I was one of the fortunate ones that God was merciful towards. And he allowed me to cross over on dry ground. And this is the sign. That's what you got to figure out, because that's what God required of his people when he did what he did for them. Not for nobody else, not for them to stun on all the other nations, but because in their journey they came up against an obstacle and they needed help to cross over. God takes care of all of the details. I tell anybody, God is a God of details. God ain't gonna roll back the water and leave you in the mud. Sometimes it may feel like that, but that is not the case. God takes care of even the smallest details. Trust him. But thank God for what he has done and for allowing you to cross over this pandemic. You may not come out unscathed, but you have been able to cross over. And the question is, what will be your memorial? So I'm wrapping up season 1 with the spirit of gratitude, just thanking God for what God has done in my life. Grateful for each and every one of you who may have listened to an episode this season. Shout out to my sister who listens to all of my episodes because she just dope like that. My sister's amazing. And so I've got some ideas for season 2. I just got to put the discipline together, because God doesn't take you through all of this for you to just revert back to life as usual. So I got to make a plan and find space to continue to do what God has called me to do and the work that God has started within me in this pandemic, and then allow it to spread to my other ministries and the other projects that I take on normally. So that confidence in my gifts and not needing to have permission to just step out on faith and to just minister in ways that may not be conventional, but that's what we're going to need moving forward. And so I just want to thank you guys. I'll be back in a couple of weeks. Going to try to stay on schedule every other Thursday, but you guys stay safe out here and just take a minute. If you don't do anything else, if you don't get anything else out of this podcast, take a minute to just thank God for what God has done and how God has rolled back stuff, dried up stuff, crossed you over stuff, and then you stop and you create some kind of memorial as a way to say thank you. So until we're back for season 2, just know that I love you guys. Y'all stay safe out here in these coronavirus streets. Well, thanks for rocking with us this episode. You can subscribe to the Mindtime Podcast on Apple, Google, or Spotify. And if the spirit moves you, feel free to rate us and tell us how we're doing. You can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at Mindtime Podcast. You can check out our website at mindtimepodcast.com. And if you would like to submit a question for a discussion here, feel free to DM us on social media, or you can email Jasmine, that's JASMINE, at mindtimepodcast.com. Until the next episode, know that we love you. Peace.